For 3 weeks, the little princess disappeared every night. Not far. Not out of the house, the doors were bolted, the guards were posted, nobody came in or went out without it being marked in a book. But somewhere inside that great old residence, in the long black hours between the time she was tucked in and the time the sun came creeping back over the fields, a 6-year-old girl was slipping out of her warm bed, padding down cold stone corridors on her bare feet, and going somewhere she had no business going. For 3 weeks, nobody knew where. And the night her father finally followed her, the night he climbed 5 floors through the dark in his stockinged feet and saw, at last, where his daughter went and who was waiting for her, it changed everything. For him. For the whole family. For an old man at the very top of the house that nobody downstairs even remembered was still alive. I know all of this because I was there for it. I worked that residence. Night staff mostly, the unglamorous hours, the ones the family never see, when the great rooms go dark and the house belongs to the few of us who keep it breathing till morning. I trimmed the lamps and banked the fires and walked the cold corridors, and over those 3 weeks I watched the whole strange, tender thing unfold, from the first empty bed to the last. Let me start at the beginning, with a grieving house, a worried father, and a bed that should not have been cold. The residence was called Hartmere. An old stone house, far, far older than the family that lived in it now, a house that had stood out in the green deep country of Crauwen, a long day's travel from the capital, since before anyone could properly say. The kind of place that looks magnificent in a painting and is perishing cold in February. Long echoing corridors where your own footsteps followed you about. Too many rooms by half more rooms than the family could ever use, whole wings shut up and sleeping. And staircases that climbed away into parts of the house nobody had reason to go anymore, up under the roof, where the heating never reached, and the dust sheets had stayed draped over the furniture, so long they'd gone gray, and the air had a held-breath stillness to it, like a room waiting for someone who was never coming back. The young Prince Aldrich, his name was, though to us below stairs he was only ever His Highness, had brought his small family out to Hartmere that winter, and there was a reason for it, a sad one. His mother had died the year before, the old Duchess, and she hadn't just lived at Hartmere, she was Hartmere in a way. She'd been born in that house and she'd lived her whole long life in it, and she died in it, in the big blue bedroom on the 2nd floor in the spring. After she went, the house sat empty for months, grieving if a house can grieve, and I think it can. I've felt it in the silence of those rooms, that particular heaviness an old house takes on when the heart's gone out of it. The fires went unlit. The dust came down. The place went cold and quiet and sad. And I think Aldrich couldn't bear it. I think the thought of his mother's house going dark and dead was more than he could stand. So one day, that winter, he decided to bring his own young family up to live in it for a while, to fill the rooms again, to make the old place live rather than let it become a tomb. That was the official reason anyway, a change of air, time in the country, all of that. But I worked nights in that house and I watched the man, and I'll tell you what I came to think. He was grieving too, badly, and he didn't have the words for it the way men like him so often don't, raised to carry themselves a certain way, to keep the lid on, to be steady for everyone else. So he grieved the only way he knew how, by doing, by moving the family, by giving himself a project. By walking his mother's corridors at strange hours, which I caught him at more than once, and pretending he was only checking the house. He had 2 children, a little boy still a baby really, scarcely walking, and the girl, Princess Myra, 6 years old. And Myra had loved her grandmother more than anyone or anything in the whole wide world. I have to tell you about Myra properly, because the whole of what happened turns on the kind of child she was. She was a quiet one, not shy, mind, there's a difference and people muddle it. Shy children hide. Myra didn't hide, she watched. She was one of those still, observing children who take in everything and give back little, who you'd find sitting perfectly composed in the corner of a room full of loud grown-ups, those big serious dark eyes moving from face to face, missing nothing. Old-fashioned, the cook used to call her. An old soul. There was a gravity to her you don't often see in one so small. And she had been her grandmother's shadow, practically reared by the old Duchess those first years, because that's how it goes in families like that. The parents are forever away on duties, here and there, opening this and attending that, and so the small ones get handed to whoever's at home with the time and the love to spare. For Myra, that had been her grandmother. The old Duchess had walked her through the gardens and told her the names of the birds, had read to her in the big chair by the library fire, had let her sit up too late and eat the soft middles out of the bread rolls, and kept it a secret between them. Myra had spent more of her small hours with that old woman than with almost any living soul. And then the old woman died. And nobody, this is the part that breaks me looking back, nobody quite understood how hard it landed on the child. Because Myra didn't make a fuss. She didn't wail, didn't cling, didn't ask the unanswerable questions out loud the way some children do. She just went quieter, quieter than her already quiet self. She folded inward, the way a flower closes at dusk, and she carried something behind those serious eyes that the grown-ups around her, all of them tangled up in their own grief, the prince most of all, were simply too sad themselves to see. That's the cruel thing about children and grief. We tell ourselves they're too young to feel it the way we do. They're resilient, we say, they bounce back, they'll have forgotten by spring. It isn't true, not even slightly. They feel every bit of it, they just haven't got the words for a thing that big, so it doesn't come out in words at all. It comes out sideways, in the things they do instead of the things they can't say. With Myra it came out in the dark, at night, in her bare feet with a stub of candle, climbing a house full of her grandmother's ghost. It was the nanny who noticed first, it always is. A young woman called Pell, kind, quick, properly fond of the child, not one of the starchy ones, but the sort who actually loved the little girl in her care and watched her like she mattered. And Pell had the good habit of looking in on Myra in the small hours, the way the best of them do, just to settle the blankets and see the child was sleeping sound. And 3 nights, maybe 4, that first week, she found the bed empty. Not just empty, cold. That was the thing that frightened her. She'd put her hand to the sheets where the child should have been, and they'd be cool to the touch, the warmth long gone out of them. As if Myra hadn't just stepped out a moment before, but had been gone a good while, long enough for a small body's heat to fade clean out of the linen. The first time, Pell told me after, she very nearly woke the whole house. Stood in that dark nursery with her heart in her mouth, about to start shouting for help. But before she could, there came a soft padding in the corridor, and Myra appeared bare feet, white nighty, calm as a Sunday, and walked straight past her and climbed back into bed as though nothing on earth was the matter. "Where have you been?" Pell whispered, half relieved, half furious the way you go when a fright turns out to be nothing. And the child, already burrowing down into the covers, just murmured, "Toilet," and turned her face to the wall. But it kept on, night after night, and the toilet does not take 3/4 of an hour, and a child does not come back from the lavatory with gray dust on the soles of her bare feet and a thread of cobweb caught in her hair and her hands faintly cold, as if she'd been somewhere the fires never reached. Pell wasn't a fool. She knew the difference between a child slipping to the bathroom and a child going somewhere, and after a week of it, frightened and out of her depth, she did the only right thing there was to do. She went to the prince. I happened to be in the corridor when she told him, refilling the wall lamps, the slow, invisible work that keeps a house like that lit, the kind of work that makes you part of the furniture, present and unseen. I wasn't meant to overhear a word of it, but you overhear everything in a house like Hartmere. The stone carries voices, and the night is quiet, and a man working a lamp is as good as a piece of the wall. And I will never forget the prince's face as Pell told him. Because the instant the words were out, "She keeps leaving her bed in the night, sir, 3 weeks now, and I can't find where she goes," I watched a father's mind go straight to the very worst place there is. You could see it pass over him like a cloud crossing the sun. Every black possibility all at once. Is there someone in the house who shouldn't be? Is someone taking her, leading her off somewhere in the dark? Is she ill, sleepwalking, feverish, something wrong in her small head? Is she frightened of something, fleeing something every night? Is my daughter in danger under my own roof in my own mother's house? And I never knew. I was asleep down the hall. I never knew. And remember, this was a man already scraped raw. He'd buried his mother that spring. He'd moved his whole family into her grieving house to keep the cold out of it. He was holding himself together with both hands as it was. And now here was his little girl, his quiet, serious 6-year-old, vanishing into the black heart of a vast old house every single night, and not one soul alive could say where. "Has anyone followed her?" he asked. His voice had gone very low and very controlled, which I'd learned was how that man sounded when he was frightened to death and refusing to show it. "I tried, sir, the once," Pell twisted her hands, "but she's quick, and this is the strange part, she knows the house, better than I do now, better than any of us, I think. She goes up, into the old part, the shut-up part, where none of us have set foot in years. Up the east stairs into the dark, and she's gone before I can keep her in sight. And she faltered. I didn't dare chase her properly, sir. I was afraid of frightening her, of her panicking on those old stairs in the dark and falling, so I came to you instead." The prince was silent for a long moment. I went very still over my lamp, hardly daring to breathe. And then he said, quiet and flat and certain, "Tonight I'll follow her myself." He didn't sleep that night. I know, because I didn't either. I was on the late round, walking the corridors, and Pell had quietly warned me to keep well away from the east stairs after midnight, because His Highness would be waiting there in the dark. And he was. I caught a glimpse of him as I passed the far end of the nursery passage, a tall shape, sitting in the little anteroom off Myra's room in the old armchair, with the door drawn to just an inch, sitting up in the cold and the black like a sentry on watch, a prince of the realm who could have sent a dozen men to do it for him, sitting alone in the dark in his shirt sleeves, keeping his own vigil over his daughter's door. There was something in that. Something that told you everything about the man, if you only saw it. The house ticked and settled around him. The old clocks counted out the small hours, one floor calling to another. The wind got up outside and worried at the roof, and he waited. And at around 1:30, by the long case clock on the landing, it happened. The nursery door eased open, slow, so careful. That particular soundless care a child takes with a door they don't want heard, easing the handle round, lifting the weight of it on the hinge so it won't creak, the whole business taking 3 times as long as simply opening it. And out into the corridor slipped Myra, bare feet on cold stone, the white nightie, and in her cupped hands a little stub of candle in a holder, the small flame leaning and steadying as she moved. Where on earth she'd got a candle and the means to light it I never did learn. She must have hoarded them away somewhere, this careful, secret child, planning. And she set off down the long dark corridor without a moment's hesitation, sure-footed, toward the east stairs and the shut-up heart of the old house, the little flame bobbing ahead of her like a will-o'-the-wisp. In the anteroom, the prince let out one slow breath, and then he rose and slipped off his shoes so his own steps would make no sound, and went after her. I caught the end of it myself. I'll confess I followed too, drawn by my own worry and, I'll be honest, my own curiosity, keeping well back, a third silent shape in that procession through the dark. So I saw the prince climb, soft-footed in his stocking feet, keeping his distance, never letting the child hear him, following nothing but the small wandering light of her candle as it rose ahead of him through floor after floor of the sleeping house. Up past the 2nd floor, where the family's own rooms gave out, past the very door of the big blue bedroom where his mother had died, and I saw him hesitate there, just half a step, before he went on. Up past the 3rd, the old guest floors, all shut up, the dust sheets standing pale in the dark like a gathering of ghosts. Then up a narrow back stair, a servant's stair, the kind that turns tight on itself, where the walls press close and the air gets colder and older and somehow thicker with every step, the smell changing from beeswax and wood smoke to dust and dry timber and time. All the way up to the very top of the house, the attics, the forgotten floor, tucked away under the great roof beams, where there was no reason on God's earth for anyone to go, the place where the overflow of the old Duchess's long life had ended up, room after low room of trunks and shrouded furniture and crates, and the packed-away leavings of 100 years of one family living and dying in one house. And right at the very end of it, down a low, mean little passage under the slope of the roof, where a tall man had to dip his head, there was a door. A plain door, old paint, the last door at the top of the world. And here is the thing that stopped the prince dead in the dark, the thing poor Pell had never climbed far enough to see, on her one frightened attempt. The thing that turned the whole night, in an instant, from one kind of mystery into another, stranger, deeper one. That door was not dark. That door was not empty and forgotten and cold. There was light beneath it. Warm light, not the thin blue-white of the moon through a broken pane, but the soft gold of a real lamp already lit, glowing out in a thin line across the floorboards of the passage. Someone was in there. Someone was already awake and waiting at the top of a forgotten stair in the dead of night. And Myra, this slip of a 6-year-old in her nightie and bare feet, who by every right ought to have been frightened out of her wits up here in the cold, and the black Myra was not frightened at all. She walked straight up to that glowing door as easy and as homecoming as a child walking into her own kitchen, and she lifted one small hand and she knocked. Not a random knock, a pattern, a soft little run of taps, one, then two, then one, like a code, like a secret password between two people who had done this many, many times before. And from inside the room an old voice answered, a man's voice, thin and cracked with great age, but warm, so warm, lifting at the sound of those knocks like a man whose whole long day had been only the waiting for them. The prince was too far back, his blood roaring too loud in his own ears to catch the words, but he heard the warmth of them. He heard a very old man say something to his daughter that sounded, more than anything, like joy. And Myra pushed the door open, and the warm gold light spilled out into the cold passage and washed over her small face, and she stepped inside and shut the door softly behind her. To someone her father had not known was breathing under the roof of his own house. And that is where I have to leave the first part of it. Because the prince stood frozen there in that freezing dark passage, his heart going like a drum, and not one piece of it made any sense. There was no one living in those attics. There couldn't be. The house was staffed and counted and guarded. Every soul under that roof was written in a book each night. Nobody came in unknown and nobody stayed unknown. And yet here was warm lamplight under a forgotten door at the top of a forgotten stair, and the voice of an old man, and his own grieving little daughter walking into him in the dead of night as simply and as gladly as walking home. He did not yet know who was behind that door. He did not know why his quiet, broken-hearted child had been climbing 5 cold floors every single night for 3 weeks to reach this room. He did not know that what waited on the other side of it would explain his mother and his daughter, and a kindness that had been quietly, faithfully happening at the very top of his house, in the dark, under all their sleeping noses. He only knew, standing there, that he could not turn around and go back down, that whatever this was, he had to see it. So he crossed that cold passage, one silent step at a time, and he put his hand to the door. And he opened it. The door opened onto a room the prince had never seen in his life. And I was just behind him on the stair, close enough now that I saw it over his shoulder in the warm gold light, and I'll carry the picture of it to my grave. It was a small room, low under the slope of the roof, the beams coming down close overhead, but it wasn't a cold storage room full of dust sheets like all the others up there. It was lived in, a narrow bed neatly made, A worn armchair pulled close to a tiny iron stove that gave out a low red warmth, a lamp on a little table, books, stacks of them, old ones on every flat surface. A shelf of small treasures, a clock, a few framed photographs gone brown with age, a chipped cup and saucer, a jar of boiled sweets. And in the armchair, wrapped in a blanket, sat the oldest man I have ever seen. Tiny, bird-like, white hair like dandelion fluff, a face folded into 1,000 soft creases. His hands, where they rested on the blanket, were thin as paper and spotted with age, but his eyes were bright, wide awake, full of light, and those bright old eyes were fixed on Myra with a tenderness that stopped your breath. She'd already climbed up onto the arm of his chair, easy as anything, completely at home, and she was telling him something in a low, eager whisper, the way she never spoke to anyone downstairs. And then she saw her father in the doorway, and the whole warm room froze. I've seen frightened children. Myra's face in that moment was something else. It wasn't fear of being hurt. It was the particular stricken look of a child caught keeping a secret they thought was good, that flood of now it'll be taken away. Her eyes went huge. Her bottom lip went, and she scrambled half off the chair arm and put herself in front of the old man, this tiny thing, arms out, the way you'd shield someone. "Don't," she said, her voice cracked right open. "Don't be cross, don't make him go, he's not doing anything wrong. I came to him, it was me. Don't take him away, please, Papa, please." And the old man put one paper-thin hand on her shoulder, gentle, and said, in that warm, cracked voice, "Hush now, little one, hush. It's all right." And he looked up at the prince standing thunderstruck in the doorway, and something moved across that ancient face, recognition, and a kind of sorrow, and something almost like relief, as if a thing he'd waited a very long time for had finally come. "Your Highness," the old man said softly, "I wondered when you'd find your way up here. I'm only sorry it frightened you." The prince's voice, when it came, was barely there. "Who are you?" And the old man smiled, a small, sad, beautiful smile. "My name is Edmund," he said. "I served your mother, I served your grandmother before her." He paused. "I have lived in this house, Your Highness, for 81 years. It came out slowly, over the next hour, in that warm little room under the roof. Myra curled against the old man's side, watching her father's face, ready to defend her secret to the last, and the prince sinking down onto the edge of the narrow bed, listening as the whole thing unspooled. Edmund had come to Hartmere as a boy, a boot boy first, the lowest of the low, 11 years old. He'd worked his way up through a lifetime of service, footman, then valet, then in the end, something more than any title, the old duchess's most trusted man for the last 40 years of her life. He'd known her since she was a young bride coming to the house. He'd known Aldrich himself as a baby. He'd been a fixture of Hartmere so long, so quietly, so far in the background that he had simply faded out of everyone's notice, the way the very old and the very faithful do. When he'd grown too old to work properly, old, past 90 now, the Duchess had not done what most great houses do, which is pension off the old servant and send him away to a cottage to die among strangers. She'd done something else, something like her, from everything I ever heard of the woman. She'd said, "Edmund was born in this house and Edmund will not leave it." And she'd given him the little room at the top, the warm one with the stove, and she'd had a girl bring his meals up, and she'd visited him herself, climbed those 5 floors, an old woman herself by then, to sit with the man who'd served her all his life and talk over the old days. She came up most evenings near the end, Edmund said. His old eyes shone. We'd sit, we'd remember. 2 old creatures at the top of the house, talking about people 50 years dead. He smiled. She was the only one who still came. Everyone else had forgotten there was an old man up here at all. That's no complaint, Your Highness. That's just how it goes when you live long enough. The world moves down the stairs and leaves you at the top. And then he said she died. And the visits stopped. And Edmund, 92 years old, alone in a room at the top of a house full of people who'd forgotten him, sat in his chair through the long winter, and waited, and nobody came at all. Until one night 3 weeks ago, there was a soft little knock at his door. "I thought I'd dreamed it," Edmund said. "An old man dreams a great deal alone up here." But I called out and the door opened and there she was. He looked down at Myra and his whole creased face softened into something close to worship. This little one, in her nightgown, with a candle, and she stood in the doorway and she looked at me, very serious, the way she does, and do you know what she said? The prince shook his head. He couldn't speak. She said, "Are you the man grandmother used to visit?" The room went very still. "I said I was," Edmund went on. "And she came in and she climbed up on the arm of this chair just there where she always sits now, and she said," his voice wavered, "she said, 'Grandmother can't come anymore, so I'll come instead, so you won't be on your own.'" And the prince made a sound, a small broken sound. I heard it. The sound of a grown man's heart, breaking and mending in the same instant. This is the thing I've turned over and over in the years since. This 6-year-old child. This quiet, watchful, grieving little girl that everyone thought was just being odd, just being difficult, just sleepwalking through her sorrow. She hadn't been running from anything in the dark. She'd been running towards something. She had understood in the way children sometimes understand things that go straight past the grown-ups. She had understood that when her grandmother died, an old man at the top of the house lost the only person who came to see him. That somewhere up there, above all the sleeping family, a faithful old soul had been left utterly alone, and nobody else had thought of it. Not the staff, not her father, not anyone. The whole house had grieved the Duchess and never once thought about the man she used to climb 5 floors to sit with. Only Myra thought of it, 6 years old, and she decided all on her own in her serious little heart that she would take it on, that she would be the one who climbed the stairs now, that her grandmother's last kindness would not die just because her grandmother had. She'd appointed herself in secret every single night, frightened of being stopped, frightened it would be taken away, the keeper of an old man nobody else remembered. That's why she'd gone quiet after the funeral. That's where the grief had gone, not into wailing, into this. Into a small, fierce, private act of love at the top of a cold house, night after night, asking nothing, telling no one. And Edmund told the prince that those nightly knocks had become the whole of his life, that he'd lie awake from dusk waiting for them, that Myra would climb up beside him and he'd tell her stories about her grandmother as a young woman, about the house in the old days, about all the people and the parties and the long-ago summers, that he was giving the child the one thing nobody else could, her grandmother, kept alive in stories. And she was giving him the one thing he'd thought was gone forever, somebody who came. "She brings her grandmother back to me," Edmund said quietly, "and I bring her grandmother back to her. We've been keeping the old lady alive between us, up here, the two of us. I didn't think there was any harm in it. His voice gave out entirely for a moment. "I only didn't want to be the last one in the house nobody remembered." The prince knelt down in front of the old man's chair. A prince on the floorboards in the dust at the top of his own house. He took one of Edmund's paper-thin hands in both of his, and he couldn't get his words out at first, and when they came they were thick and broken. "I didn't know," he said. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were here. My mother I never thought. You served this family for 80 years, and I let you sit up here alone all winter, and I never once climbed the stairs." He pressed the old hand to his forehead. "My 6-year-old daughter knew. She knew, and she did something about it, and I, the master of this house, I forgot you even existed." "You weren't to know, Your Highness," Edmund said gently. "Houses forget their old people. It's the way of things. I made my peace with it long ago." "Well, it's not the way of things in this house anymore," the prince said, "and there was steel in it now under the tears. Not while I'm alive." And Myra, who had been watching all this with her huge, serious eyes, slowly understanding that the secret was not being destroyed but received, Myra crept off the chair arm and into her father's side, and she whispered, So you're not cross. He gathered her up. Cross, he said into her hair. Myra, my darling. You did the kindest thing anyone in this whole house has done since your grandmother died. I have never been less cross with anyone in my life. And that is where the second part has to end. Because the secret was out now, but a secret coming out is only ever the middle of a story, never the end. There was the question of Edmund. What now for a faithful old man who'd been left to fade at the top of the house? There was the family, the rest of them, who'd have to be told. There was the question that hung over the whole warm little room, and that nobody had said out loud yet. The question of how much time the very old man in the armchair had left, because 92 is 92, and the bright eyes and the warm voice couldn't hide how frail the rest of him had grown. And there was Myra, who had carried this alone for 3 weeks, and who would not, I think, ever quite be the same child again, because she had learned, far too young, the thing it takes most of us a lifetime to understand. That the old and the forgotten are not invisible. That somebody has to climb the stairs. That love is mostly just showing up in the dark, in the cold, when no one's watching, asking nothing back. What the prince decided to do next for Edmund, and because of what his small daughter had quietly taught the master of the house about his own house, is the last part of it. And it brought the whole family up those 5 flights of stairs in the end, to a room at the top that none of them had ever seen. The prince didn't move Edmund downstairs. That surprised me, I'll admit. I'd assumed that was where it was headed, that the old man would be brought down to a warm room on a proper floor, near the family, near the kitchens, somewhere easier to reach. It would have been the sensible thing, the kind thing even on the face of it. But when Aldrich raised it, gently the next morning, Edmund, we could bring you down somewhere nearer, somewhere warm, the old man shook his white head. This is my room, your highness, he said. I came to this house 81 years ago, and I've slept under this roof every night since. I was born to a house that isn't standing anymore, and this is the only home I've got left in the world, and it's up here. If it's all the same to you, I'd like to die in my own room when the time comes. With the beams over me, where I can hear the rooks on the chimney of a morning. The prince was quiet a moment. Then you'll stay, he said, but you won't be alone up here, not ever again, not for an hour. And he meant it. That's the thing about Aldrich. Once that man decided something, it was done. He didn't make the old man come down to the family. He brought the family up to the old man. It started small. The very next evening, Aldrich himself climbed the 5 flights again, and this time he didn't creep. He came up openly, a lamp in his hand, and he knocked Myra's little knock at the door, and he sat with Edmund for an hour and let the old man tell him about his mother as a young woman, things he'd never known. Stories of the Duchess at 20, at 30, wild, funny, human stories that the grieving, careful family had lost along with her. Aldrich came down those stairs with his eyes red, and something eased in his face that had been clenched tight since the funeral. Because that was the other thing nobody had seen. Edmund wasn't just a forgotten old man who needed company. Edmund was a library. He held 80 years of the family inside him, 80 years of the Duchess, of the house, of people the prince had only known as portraits and gravestones. And it had all very nearly gone up the chimney with him, unheard, while everyone downstairs grieved a woman they could have known so much better if they'd only thought to climb the stairs. Myra had found the one door in the whole house that still had her grandmother behind it, and she'd opened it for all of them. After that, the room at the top of the house became the warmest room in it. The family came up in turns, Aldrich in the evenings. The princess, Myra's mother, who'd been away and came home to all this and wept when she heard it, and then started climbing the stairs herself, bringing soup, sitting for hours. They even carried the baby up, once he could be trusted not to grab everything, and set him on the rug by the little stove, and Edmund watched him crawl about with an expression of pure, brimming joy. This man at the very end of a long life delighting in one at the very start. The staff started going up too. Once it was known, once the master of the house had made it plain that the old man at the top mattered, that he was family in the way the truly faithful become family, everything changed. The girl who'd brought his meals up grudgingly now stayed to chat. The cook sent up his favorites. Somebody got the chimney swept properly and the little stove drawing better, so the room was warm right through. I went up myself on my night rounds and got into the habit of looking in, and Edmund would have a story for me too, every time, his bright eyes lifting at the sound of the door. The man who'd been the last person in the house nobody remembered became, for his final season, the most visited soul in it. And Myra still came every night. That never stopped. The family coming by day didn't replace it, it sat alongside it. Every night at 1:30 the little knock would come, and Myra would climb up onto the arm of the chair where she'd always sat, and the two of them would have their own private hour, the keeping of the grandmother alive between them, the way they'd started. Aldrich let it be. He understood by then that it wasn't a problem to be solved. It was the truest thing in the house. Edmund lasted the spring and most of the summer. I want to tell it honestly. He was 92 and then 93, and the body that held that bright mind was very tired. By midsummer, he didn't leave the chair much. By August, he didn't leave the bed. But here is the thing, here is the whole point of what Myra did when you come right down to it. He was not alone for one single hour of it. There was always someone on the stairs, always a knock at the door. The room was warm and there were flowers in it from the garden, and there was nearly always the sound of the family in it, low voices, the baby, Myra's whispering. He went in the end on a soft August night in his own room, under his own beams, with the window open so he could hear the rooks. The prince was with him. And so, because she would not be sent away and Aldrich hadn't the heart to make her, was Myra, sitting in her usual spot on the arm of the chair they'd pulled to the bedside, holding the old paper-thin hand in both of her small ones, the way her father had held it the night this all began. Edmund's last words, the prince told me after, were to her. He looked at the little girl who'd appointed herself the keeper of a forgotten old man, and he said, "You came. Every night you came." And he smiled. "Thank you for coming, little one. Tell your grandmother," and then he was too tired to finish it, and he didn't need to, and he closed his eyes, and a while later he was gone. He'd been born in a house that no longer stood. He died in the only home he had left, at the top of it, not forgotten, not alone, with a child's hands round his. There are worse ways for a long life to end. I've seen most of them. That was one of the good ones, one of the very good ones, and it was a 6-year-old who made it so. They buried him in the family plot. That was Aldrich's decision, and it raised a few eyebrows among the sort of people who care about such things, a servant in the family ground, but the prince wouldn't hear a word against it. He gave this family 81 years, he said. He kept my mother's whole life safe inside him when the rest of us let it slip. He's more family than half the names on those stones. He'll lie with us. And so he does. Not far from the old Duchess he served and loved for 40 years. The two of them near each other again, the way they'd been at the top of the house in the end. Myra chose the flowers. I left Hartmere a few years after. Time moves on, staff move on, that's the way of houses. But I went back once a long while later for a thing the family held, and I saw Myra again. Not so little anymore, a tall, quiet, serious girl on her way to being a young woman with the same watchful eyes. And someone, one of the newer staff, was complaining, kindly enough, but complaining, about an old gardener on the estate, very old, gone a bit strange and solitary, who lived alone in a cottage at the far edge of the grounds and whom nobody much went to see. And I watched Myra's face when she heard it. I watched her go still, in that old way of hers. And I knew, before she said a word, I knew that she'd be walking out to that cottage, that she'd be knocking on that door, that whatever she'd learned at 6 years old at the top of that cold house, in the dark, alone, She had never once unlearned it. That the old and the forgotten are not invisible. That somebody has to be the one who comes. I think about it still more than I'd have expected. A whole grand house full of grown people, staff, family, guards, all of us, and every single one of us walked past the bottom of those stairs for a whole winter and never once thought to climb them. We grieved the woman who died and forgot the man who lived. We're all like that, I think, if we're honest. We forget the people at the top of the house, the old ones, the faithful ones. The ones the world has quietly moved on past and left up there in the cold, waiting for a knock that doesn't come. It took a 6-year-old to remember. It took a child small enough still to believe that being lonely was a thing you could simply fix by getting up in the night and climbing the stairs and saying, "I'll come instead, so you won't be on your own." We taught her nothing. She taught us everything. And every time since that I've thought about walking past a door I ought to knock on, an old friend I've let drift, a relative I keep meaning to call, anyone left alone at the top of their own house. I think of a little girl with a candle, climbing 5 cold flights in the dark, asking nothing, telling no one. And I climb the stairs. Somebody always has to.